I've loved poems all my life. I've loved reading. I was the kind of kid that read the cereal box, and knew all the ingredients and things because I'd read those things, and reading was encouraged in my house.
This is a woman whose great-great-grandmother was a slave from the West African kingdom of Dahomey, now the Republic of Benin. A woman who went on to be one of the most celebrated artists of her lifetime and ours. And this is her story. 13 poetry collections, 2 nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in the same year, 16 children's books that focused on African American heritage and daily life, a memoir written with Toni Morrison as editor, 2 National Endowment for the Arts fellowships, named Poet Laureate of the state of Maryland in 1974, named Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets in 1999. Lucille Clifton was one of the most important voices of the 20th century. So where did this artist's life begin? Born Thelma Lucille Sales in Depew, New York, near Buffalo, on June 27, 1936, Lucille Clifton attended both Howard University and the State University of New York at Fredonia. In early adulthood, she worked in positions in state and local government, including as a claims clerk in Buffalo and later in Baltimore, Maryland.
Seeing her write at a kitchen table, at a dining room table, at an old-fashioned manual typewriter was something that seemed just so natural.
Grown daughter, someone is helping me with the onions, who peels in the opposite direction without tears and promises different soup. I sit with her, watching her, learning to love her, but who is she? Who is she? Who?
As Clifton continued to see her books published, she earned places as a poet of renown at several academic institutions. She was a writer in residence at Copan State College in Baltimore, Maryland. Clifton also spent years as a visiting writer at Columbia University School of the Arts and at George Washington University. She was a fellow at Dartmouth College. Clifton also taught literature and creative writing at the University of California at Santa Cruz. And for nearly 20 years, she was Distinguished Professor of Literature and Humanities at St. Mary's College of Maryland.
I think of her as somebody who is able to speak so directly in her poems, who's reckoning with some of the most immense, epic, difficult things to reckon with: the loss of children, the loss of a spouse, sexual abuse, racism, violence, racialized violence, and there's such fierce looking, there's such anger and tenderness and forgiveness.
Clifton published her book of poems, Good Times, in 1969. It was the beginning of a decades-long journey as a poet whose work continues to resonate today because of its difficult subjects: injustice, racism, sexism.
She was making sense of things. She was translating something from some very visceral place into words that people could digest and then feel that would resonate with people, they would feel less alone, that they would feel understood. They could translate whatever this big thing was into that's what it is. Yes. My mother's work and her legacy can be part of that resolution, that balm, that comfort, that way forward in what times that have seemed darker than we thought they might be when we were imagining 2019 and 2020.
The earliest of the poems in the new collection were written during the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, the nuclear age, ecological crises, independent movements across Africa. Today, they ring true with an audience facing climate change, social injustice, and political upheaval. In the collected poems of Lucille Clifton, 1965 to 2010, editor Kevin Young touched on the timeliness of Clifton's work when, in his afterword, he wrote, "Both the poetry world and the world of the 1960s were in upheaval. The years from 1965 to 1969 saw the assassinations of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and the first human walking on the moon, all of which appear in the poems. The Black arts movement, which Lucille Clifton found herself a part of and in many ways helped to forge, insisted on poems for and about Black folks, establishing a Black aesthetic based on varying ways of Black speech, African structures, and political action."
All of these things we're precariously here, carrying these questions about what human rights mean and are, what our responsibility to the planet might be to each other. And these are things that are central to her work across decades.
Beyond the power of continuing to share Clifton's work with the world, another way her influence continues to be felt is in how her poetry inspires a new generation of writers. Boa Editions is helping see to it that those writers' voices, particularly women of color, are amplified. It's a significant way to honor Clifton's legacy. Poet Ariselis Girmay serves as editor-at-large for a publishing line from Boa Editions, launched in 2020, that will spotlight new poetry books by women of color. The Blessing the Boats selections, named in honor of Clifton's National Book Award-winning collection, Blessing the Boats, New and Selected Poems, also the title of one of Clifton's most beloved poems.
The legacy of keeping a space open for poets of color, for underserved writers. I think we're hoping that this election, the Blessing the Boats selections, will be sort of that, will have that ripple effect. That poets who are featured then have a space, and they then make a space, and they continue. The spaces get wider and wider and wider. And that continues. That doesn't end.
Turning into my own, turning on into my own self at last, turning out of the white cage, turning out of the lady cage, turning at last on a stem like a black fruit, in my own season at last.
Clifton battled health problems later in life. She had a kidney transplant and multiple bouts with cancer, but she continued to do the work. Through it all, she kept her sense of humor both in her poetry and in her life. Her writings continue to do work in the world in which we live. The hard work of offering a new generation clarity, wisdom, and hope.
Living takes courage. I admire courage tremendously. I've been courageous once or twice, not as much as I'd like to be, but maybe sometimes more than I thought I'd be, you know. But that's what courage is, to go out on your fear, to walk out on your fear. And that's what poetry is, taking the risk of going out on your fear.
Blessing the Boats. May the tide that is entering even now, the lip of our understanding, carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain that it will love your back. May you open your eyes to water, water waving forever, and may you in your innocence sail through this to that.